Hi, I'm Natalie Hoffman with flyingfreenow.com, and today we are going to be talking about how writing can help us figure out what's going on in our confusing marriage. Pull up my notes here. All right, so if you are tangled up in a confusing and painful marriage, one effective strategy to gain a solid footing and eventually a voice is to write things down. It doesn't matter if you're a good writer or not. That's not the issue. Your purpose is not to win a Pulitzer Prize. So when a stressful or emotionally draining incident happens in our relationship, what happens is that our prefrontal cortex, the part of our brain that is creative and thinks through things and solves problems, that part of our brain shuts down. And our amygdala, the part of our brain that's at the base of our skull, that its job is to notice danger and put us into flight, fight, freeze, or fawn mode, that part of our brain gets revved up. Writing slows it all down and allows us to complete the stress cycle by feeling into our bodies and accessing different parts of our brain through the physical act of writing, as well as thinking through what we want to set down on paper. And that's why I recommend that you actually use a physical pen and paper for this and not necessarily your computer. Although if you need to keep things secret, you can certainly use an app on your phone or whatever. That's better than nothing. But I remember in my former marriage, I would write in a journal and then I had to hide those journals in hiding places. Otherwise, my ex would, I'm not married to him anymore, but he would find them and read them and actually write in them himself. All right, so here are 3 important things that you can record on paper or on your computer, if you need to, that will be tremendously helpful to you over time. First of all, write down the incidents that stir your emotions. So when something happens that causes really big feelings in your body, write it down and try to do it as soon after the incident has occurred as possible. This is important because if the conversation triggers these big feelings in your body, you are going to likely forget much of what took place shortly after it happens. Now, you won't necessarily want to write down what happened because it often goes against what your brain is actually invested in believing is true. For example, on a subconscious level, your brain might want to believe that you married your best friend and that he's really a great guy who just once in a while goes off the rails. So when you're writing down what actually happened, it forces your brain to look at reality from an objective standpoint. This can feel uncomfortable at best and devastating at worst. We don't like to feel icky. We would rather just gloss over what happened and believe that it wasn't a big deal. And maybe it wasn't, but writing it down to read later will help you figure that out. You'll want to write down everything that you can remember. Body language, the words that were used, the words that you said, the words that he said, how you felt at the time. What was your body feeling at the time? Any background information, thoughts that were running through your head, things that you suspect, but you don't know for sure, as well as things that you do know for sure that are factual. Sometimes you won't have time to write very much, and that's okay. Just writing a few key things about what happened will help jog your memory in the future when you go back to look for patterns of behavior, your patterns of behavior, as well as your partner's patterns of behavior. And when you go back and read your journal 6 months to a year later, you're going to be able to see those patterns more clearly. And then you can make decisions about whether or not you want to change any of them and how you're going to do that. Now, I like to set a timer when I do this kind of thing. My brain says, oh no, this is going to feel icky. But if I set a timer, then I can say to my brain, I'm only going to write for 10 minutes and then it will be over and I'll move on. But if you don't have any time at all, even just writing down the date and the word conflict or incident will, at the very least, help you see how often these kinds of things are happening. What about the verse that says, "Love keeps no record of wrongs." So, although I had kept journals since I was in high school, I rarely wrote down bad incidents that happened in my marriage because I believed that the verse, "Love keeps no record of wrongs," meant that if I loved my husband, I would try to forget anything negative that happened between us. And that was probably the key reason that I stayed in denial for 2 decades. It was actually my excuse to avoid facing the emotional pain of what was happening. When an incident occurred and the pain was real and present, it was like jumping into Lake Superior, an icy shock. But then I'd climb out and try to pretend it didn't happen or that it wasn't as bad as it felt. I would cooperate in sweeping it under the rug and moving on. It felt better to take my mind off the pain and focus on the good things in my life. On rare occasions, I would write something down because it was just so awful, but then I'd tear the pages out of my journal later because I consciously made the choice to forget the details. And I thought I was doing the Christian thing. I spiritualized my denial. And I had the support of doing this from well-meaning Christians, and that all made me feel better. But it also kept me stuck. Why does writing about our conflicts help? Putting your experiences in writing is going to enable you to see patterns of behavior on both sides from more of an objective bird's eye view. Now, obviously, things are bad. Nothing is resolved. You want to figure out why. You need to figure out where the loops are and what's triggering them. When we are in the heat of the moment, the frontal lobe of our brain shuts down and we go into this fight or flight mode. And then depending on our personality or our past experience, we either fight back or we just check out and run away. But your brain does not think clearly when it's in this fight or flight mode. And this is why we're not able to remember very much after a severe conflict. But if you write down as much as you can remember, next time you may remember more. I found this out to be true for myself. You want to stimulate your brain to slow down and notice things, and writing stuff down will help you do this, especially once you get in the habit of this. When you're in the middle of your altercation, you'll be thinking to yourself, okay, what's happening? Because you'll be thinking, I'm going to be writing this down later on. Now, one way you'll be able to remember more is if you take deep breaths when you are in the middle of your incident. Try not to say too much. Imagine that you are floating above the situation and looking down as an observer. This will help you to emotionally disconnect and have a more objective view. This objective view will do wonders to clear up the constant fog and confusion you may feel in your relationship. As you see the patterns more clearly, you will grow more confident in your perception of things, and you will be more assertive in standing up for what you know is actually happening. The goal is to eventually become so sure of what's happening that when others try to cast doubt on you or minimize what happened, or even tell you that you've maybe made it up in your head, you will not be moved. You know, you've got it all in writing, lots and lots of examples. But you need to know that you know that you know the truth. Secondly, keep conversations with the other person and any of their allies or helpers, in other words, flying monkeys, in writing. In early 2013, I read a book called The Verbally Abusive Relationship: How to Recognize It and How to Respond. And I would read it late at night before going to sleep. And I often fell asleep crying. My stomach felt like a black pit of pain. But I was beginning to recognize the fact that if I ever wanted to find a way out, I needed to pass through the oppressive process of seeing the truth, accepting the truth, and making the tough decisions required to deal with it. Learning those verbal tactics of emotionally abusive individuals is extremely important, and I can't stress this enough. Once you become aware of how words are put together in subtle ways to blame, shame, dismiss, avoid, lie, rationalize, and minimize, you will be able to recognize those tactics in the person that you're dealing with. The problem is when you're actually in a live conversation with the person and your stress level is high, it's harder to track these tactics on the fly, especially at first. It's best when you are in learning mode to put all these conversations that revolve around the more triggering subjects in your relationship in writing. This can be via text, email, or even a journal that you can take turns writing in. So I recommend text or email simply because there is no danger of the other person deleting or changing anything. You'll need to have your own phone and your own email account. If you share one only because your spouse won't let you get your own, then you are in a controlling relationship, not a mutually respectful and honoring or Christian relationship. You are an adult. You can have your own email account, and you don't need permission to do that as if you were someone's child or someone's property. So what's the benefit of keeping all of your conversations with this person in writing? Well, the rewards of seeing everything in writing are numerous. First of all, you get to see your relational patterns. You can analyze what you are saying that contributes to the same old destructive dance pattern. This was life-changing for me. For example, for several months in 2015, I had a few people from my church listen in on some of our email conversations that I was having between my husband and I. So we copied all of our correspondence to these people at church. Now, even before this, I had experimented with having someone else read everything. And the feedback I got again and again was that I was too wordy and I was assigning motives to the things he was doing. In other words, I was saying, well, he's doing this because he blah, 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 blah. They also told me that I was trying too hard to get him to understand all of the ins and outs of the subject. I was over defending my stand on things as if they were possibly flawed. So with that feedback and my looking at my emails from a more objective standpoint, I began to change the way I wrote and communicated with my now ex-husband. Now, my emails and my texts were never perfect, nor do they need to be. I'm human, and so are you. But they improved, and that was what was important, okay? So I worked on eliminating unnecessary words. I tried to keep out my opinions and just state the facts. I got better at not defending my viewpoint, and instead, I would just state it and have my back on it. I started using words like I think and I feel and my view is instead of words like you think and you are. And then I detached from all expectations of how he might respond. I got to the point where I accepted that he could respond or not respond however he wanted. He didn't have to respond the way I wished he would. If he empathized, great. If not, no surprise. If he responded, fantastic. And if he didn't answer, no surprise. I began to grow up. I found dignity for myself, and I didn't need my husband to give it to me. God already gives us dignity, and God wanted me to give it to myself too. I also began to grow a better idea of how my husband and I were two separate people making our own choices. I used to think that we were linked in this mysterious union of oneness just because we had signed a marriage contract, that his choices were somehow linked to me and vice versa. Now I see that oneness happens when two people invest in building that kind of intimacy. And that never happened in our relationship. And I had to eventually let go of my longing for it and accept and live in reality. Recognizing my separateness from my husband was a huge step toward better emotional and relational help. The third thing that writing can help you with is it helps you learn how to identify abuse tactics. So you get to see the other person's tactics in black and white. You can read them and analyze them through the grid of what you've learned, especially when you read books like The Verbally Abusive Relationship or Who's Pushing Your Buttons or Foolproofing Your Life. all of those books were pivotal in waking me up and helping me turn the wheel of the ship in the other direction. So phrases and words that would normally confuse me put me on the defensive and distract me from the original conversation. Now they popped out at me as specific tactics with names and definitions. I wasn't feeling as confused or even as defensive. I could calmly and objectively look at his words in black and white and realize, oh, he's minimizing his responsibility here. Oh, I get it. He's denying here. And here he's only telling part of the story and leaving out the part that I asked for. This is not a me problem. This is a him problem. It's his problem to solve, not mine. So let's take that last tactic, giving partial answers. Okay. Normally I would say something like, if my husband gave me a partial answer and not a full answer to the question that I'd asked him, I would say something like, you're trying to control me by leaving out the information I asked for and only giving me part of it. You're confusing me. And then this would continue the negative nature of the conversation and put him on the defensive again. Eventually, I would respond in writing with something more along the lines of this. I asked you this, such and such question. I still don't have the answer to my question. Please let me know the answer by such and such a time. Thank you. Now, I would wonder why he was employing this tactic, and I might have even thought I knew why, depending on the circumstance, but that is only important and workable in a normal, healthy relationship where two people are invested in the care of the other one. In a dysfunctional relationship, the only important thing is getting the answer to the question. Someone once introduced me to the phrase transactional relationship. Exactly. In a transactional relationship, that means there is no two-way, mutually respectful, honoring, intimate connection. So why should we pretend there is? Just get your business taken care of and move it on. All right. Finally, you want to write down just journal your journey. Now, this might sound like the first thing we talked about, writing down the incidents that happened, but it's not. No, the first thing we talked about is just writing down specific incidents that you encounter with the other person. Journaling your journey is more about everything else in your life, but mostly it's about what you are learning and how you are growing. So in my journal, I might write down quotes from books I'm reading, or verses that pop out at me from reading the Bible, or incidents that happen to me with other people, including my kids, that maybe relate to things that God's teaching me. I might write down some aha moments that run through my head as I'm driving or getting ready for the day. Again, you don't need to have nice handwriting. You don't need a fancy journal. And many of my entries are just short and sweet. So how does it help as far as to track your journey in this way? Well, when I look back at my past journals, I can see the thinking patterns that kept me stuck in my situation. My motives were good. I wanted to be the best wife and mom that I could be. But looking back, I can see how much of an idol those things were, how much I tried to be perfect and beat myself up every day for failing. I can see the depth of fear that I dealt with and how many of my choices were rooted in this fear. If you take just 5 minutes at the end of each day to quickly jot down anything significant that you learned or thought about or experienced, over the course of a month, you will have invested 2.5 hours of recording your life. And you will be surprised to see what you've learned and how you've grown in just 1 month. Over the course of a year, you will have invested 31 hours, and the insights will be invaluable and encouraging. The other beneficial thing about writing stuff down is that when it comes time to explain your story to others, you will have already processed it in various ways, and you'll be able to clearly articulate the main points. Now, this doesn't mean people will listen or understand, but it does mean that you will have done your best to communicate it, and that's all you need. I'm at the point where I no longer try to explain my story to anyone. I've done that, and I did it the best I could. What they believe is their business and has no bearing on the truth or what I choose to do with what has happened or what continues to happen in my own life. You are a witness to your reality, and that is enough. The only judge that counts is your Heavenly Father, and He already knows it all and remembers it all better than we ever could. If you would like more intense support and education as you walk through your own confusing and painful marriage, I encourage you to check out the Flying Free Education and Support Program by going to joinflyingfree.com. Until next time, fly free.